In the ocean, there is a very simple hierarchy. There are things that get eaten, and there is the killer whale. They hunt seals, drown whales, dissect great whites. The orca is, by every biological definition, an apex predator.
Nothing hunts them.
Nothing even challenges them. At least, that's what we're told. Recently, marine biologists started noticing something that was strange. While tracking pods of orcas in the North Atlantic in the middle of a herring hunt, something changed. One minute, the orcas were hunting, and the next, the entire pod suddenly stops. They drop their food, they stop their communication, and then they run. And not just, oh, they just got bored so they decided to leave. They ran and fled the scene in a visible state of panic. They were reacting the exact same way a seal reacts when it sees an orca. But nothing hunts orcas. Nothing can hunt orcas. The thing they were running from wasn't a massive shark or a prehistoric monster. In fact, compared to a bull orca, the animal chasing them is almost small. This is the pilot whale. Orcas are larger than them, stronger than them, and smarter than them. So why would they ever flee from what just kinda looks like an adorable grey chunk of blubber? Well, to understand why this is happening, let's put a pilot whale here and a killer whale here. Orcas are clearly bigger. They're also about 6,500 pounds heavier on average. In human terms, this is like Shaq versus Jimmy from science class. You should just be able to sit on the smaller guy and win. Despite their names, pilot whales are also dolphins, kinda like killer whales, but they look a bit more dorky. They have these blunt, rounded heads, often called melons, and they lack the sick black and white war paint that makes orcas look so intimidating. The orca is a predator designed to kill, well, basically anything it wants to, and the pilot whale is designed to eat mid-sized squid, not even giant squid, just like these guys. But this case of orcas being scared of pilot whales didn't just happen once. When researchers played the sounds of pilot whales through underwater speakers, the orcas didn't get aggressive. They didn't try to investigate a potential meal. Instead, they took off. They consistently moved miles away from the source of the sound, often abandoning prime hunting grounds just to put distance between themselves and these dorky squid eaters. So why does the mere sight, or even just the sound, of a pilot whale trigger an immediate retreat? Well, let's take a look at what the pilot whale actually does. Orcas revolve around the surface and mid-range depths, but pilot whales operate a bit deeper, around 3,000 meters deep. The pilot whale's psychology is essentially built around the sprint. Their lungs are designed to collapse safely under pressure, and their muscles are packed with myoglobin to store oxygen for these intense maneuvers. They look like blobs, but they're unbelievably agile blobs. But even being fast doesn't necessarily make you a threat to a 30-foot apex predator. Unless, of course, if you aren't alone. Orcas hunt in pods. They're known for this. This is why they're able to take down larger whales, even though in a normal 1v1, orcas wouldn't actually be able to take down things like a sperm or blue whale alone. But their pods are limited. 8 is common, 20 is usually a high end. Pilot whales have entire clans. These can number into the hundreds, and in the North Atlantic, it's not uncommon at all to find a group of 100 pilot whales all travelling together. When pilot whales hear the calls of orcas, they don't do what every other whale does, which is hide. They actually move towards the sound. They seek out the orcas. Scientists call this attraction to predator calls, which sounds like a suicide mission, but is actually a brilliant defense. Instead of being hunted, they become the hunters. They form a wall of meat, muscle, and blubber, a phalanx that aggressively charges the orcas. Imagine a dozen orcas trying to maintain their hunting position when 50 or 60 angry, high-speed pilot whales are slamming into them, flanking them, and screaming at them from every direction. Remember Shaq versus Little Jimmy? Well, if you have 7 Jimmys beating up each Shaq, the fight starts to not look that fair. Pilot whales aren't tiny fish. They are still strong. I know these analogies got a little weird, but stay with me. The weirdest part of all of this is despite the charging and the high-speed chases, these two species rarely actually ever touch each other. No one is being bitten to death. There's no blood in the water. The fight is over before it even begins, because the pilot whales are blinding them. If you took away an orca's eyeballs, it wouldn't care. Well, it definitely still would. That was an exaggeration. But it can see through sound almost perfectly. Its echolocation and sonar are so precise it can detect a salmon from the size of its swim bladder hundreds of feet away. Sound is an orca's everything, and the pilot whale knows it. Pilot whales are some of the most talkative and vocal creatures in the sea, and when 100 of them come in and start yapping as loud as they possibly can, orcas suddenly can't even hear each other. The sheer decibel level of 100 pilot whales screaming at once is enough to create an acoustic shield. There is a leading hypothesis that pilot whales engage in acoustic jamming. By mimicking orca calls and overlaying them with their own complex vocalizations, they effectively blind the orca's sonar. But if an orca is physically stronger, why doesn't it just stand its ground and fight through the noise? Surely you, as grown apex predators, wouldn't get bullied by the equivalent of a bunch of little kids. In the world of predators, there is something called the apex predator paradox. When you are at the top of the food chain, you actually have the most to lose from a fight. If a 15-pound honey badger gets into a scrap with a leopard and gets a nasty cut on its leg, it might be okay. But if an orca, an animal that depends on its physical perfection to hunt, gets a moderate injury, they're dead. A broken jaw, a torn dorsal fin, or a deep muscle bruise from a 5-ton pilot whale ramming into its side at 20 miles per hour means the orca can't hunt. If it can't hunt, it can't eat. If it can't eat, the pod might leave it behind to maintain their own survival. Evolution has made orcas incredibly smart, and part of being smart is doing the math. Pilot whales are famously grumpy. They are one of the few species that will charge things just for being in their personal space. If the pods fight, they could win. They could also lose. It's a gamble, and well, it's much easier to just leave. Why risk your life to fight a mob of crazy squid hunters when you can just swim 10 miles away and find some seals who aren't looking to pick a fight? The most dangerous person is someone with nothing to lose. Because of this logical, biological math, the fear is real. If you were to look at a satellite map of where orcas spend their time in the North Atlantic, you'd start to see some black holes. These are regions which are specifically pilot whale hotspots that the orcas simply refuse to enter. It's what scientists call a cartography of fear. The pilot whales establish territories, and through their aggression, they push orcas out. This has massive ripples through the ecosystem. When the orcas are forced to move, the herring, salmon, and seals in those pilot whale zones are suddenly safe. The presence of the pilot whales creates a sanctuary for smaller animals, simply by being too annoying for the apex predators to handle. Fear dictates the movement of even the strongest animals on Earth. The most powerful predator in the history of the world is effectively a nomad, constantly moving to avoid a confrontation with a smaller, louder, and, well, mentally insane cousin. But if pilot whales are able to push out the apex predator, then why aren't they considered the ultimate apex predators? The reason we still call the orca the apex and not the pilot whale comes down to a very simple rule in biology. What is actually killing? You don't really just stick a rat in a box with 20 ants and call the rat an apex predator. Or I guess you can, but it's really not serving much of a point. Orcas are generalists. They can kill anything. They can figure out how to eat great whites in Africa, bowhead whales in the Arctic, and stingrays in New Zealand. They can live anywhere and eat almost anything because they are culturally adaptable. If the world changes, the orca changes. The pilot whale, on the other hand, is a specialist. They are squid-eating machines. Nearly their entire life is built around deep water sprinting and social mobbing. Their dominance is local dominance. In a head-on meeting in the North Atlantic, they win because they have the home court advantage and the numbers. But the pilot whale's social structure is incredibly fragile. They are so socially glued together that if one individual strands itself on a beach, the entire pod will often follow it to their death because they simply refuse to be separated. They're near apex because very few things challenge them. But if they ever are caught in a 1v1 match against an orca, they're cooked. Nature is complicated, so definitions can be a bit ambiguous sometimes. And this is actually showing too. Orcas are smart. They don't just always accept defeat. Recently, researchers have seen something interesting. Some orca pods have started to change their vocalizations to be silent when entering pilot whale territory. They are experimenting with stealth mode, trying to pick off prey and move through the area before the local pilot whale mob can realize they're even there. There are even a few rare observations of bull orcas hanging out at the fringes of pilot whale pods, almost like they're scouting for a weakness, searching for that one moment when a pilot whale is alone and vulnerable. Neither of them seem to be nice to each other, yet there's still not that much direct violence. Marine biologists have even seen pilots basically trolling orcas. They will follow orcapods for miles, sometimes even days, long after the initial threat has passed. They aren't trying to eat them, they're just bothering them. They'll pop up whenever the orcas try to socialize or sleep, essentially harassing them like an annoying little brother who won't go away. They also engage in kleptoparasitism, which basically means stealing someone else's lunch. Sometimes, an orcapod will spend hours meticulously herding herring into bait ball. Just when they're about to feed, a group of pilot whales will scream into the area, scatter the fish, and swim away without eating a single one. It's spite. Pure biological spite. The only other animal known to intentionally go out of its way to ruin an orca hunt is the humpback whale. In fact, humpbacks will travel from miles away at the mere sound of orcas hunting. But unlike pilot whales, humpbacks are giant. They use their massive 15-foot fins as biological bats to shield seal pups and other whales from orcas, basically just being a giant wall of big flabby flesh to stop the orcas from eating. They won't kill the orcas. They can't really do that. The orcas are too fast, but they will stop them from being able to hurt anyone else. I guess someone's standing up for the seals? It's not that the entire ocean is trying to stop orca bullying though. Scientifically known as Pseudorca crassidens, these are false killer whales, a direct cousin to the pilot whale. To a human, and even to some prey fish, they are almost indistinguishable from a pilot whale. They've got the same dark, sleek skin, a similar bulbous forehead, and a similar size. You'd think that if an orca heard their clicks, they'd trigger the same panic button and vanish into the deep. But they don't. In fact, in certain parts of the ocean, the exact opposite happens. Marine biologists have documented instances of fake killer whales and orcas not just tolerating each other, but actually socializing. There are records of them traveling together for days on end, moving in a massive, multi-species superpod. Even more bizarrely, they've been seen sharing food. These are two of the ocean's most elite predators, grabbing dinner together. This reveals something fundamental about the conflict we've been talking about. The orca's fear of the pilot whale isn't some blind, biological instinct where they just get scared by a large dolphin. The orcas aren't running specifically from a shape or sound. It's a very specific beef. They know that false killer whales are genuinely chill, social, and cooperative. But they also know that pilot whales are not chill and not cooperative. It's a cultural war between specific species, not just everything that looks similar to them. So if the pilot whales are bothering them so much, why haven't orcas evolved a counter strategy yet? Honestly, it just hasn't bothered them enough yet. They've basically established in their culture that trying to fight the pilot whales still isn't worth it. For now, the best counter strategy is just avoiding. However, as the Arctic ice melts and the herring move further north, the ranges of the orca and the pilot whale are beginning to overlap more frequently. These mobbing events that were pretty rare before are now happening more often. When resources become scarce, conflict avoidance eventually goes to desperation. Scientists are wondering, will there be a breaking point? Will orcas eventually be pushed far enough that they start to figure out how to dismantle a pilot whale mob? If the orcas begin to develop a counter strategy, perhaps by learning how to divide the pod into smaller groups or by targeting the pilot specifically, we might just see the bloodiest oceanic war in human history. The Battle of the Whales. That are actually dolphins, but are called whales. At the end of the day, apex predator is just a human label. We love to put things in a pyramid. We like to think there is always one person or one animal on top. But the relationship between the orca and the pilot whale shows it's a bit deeper than that. You can be the king of the food chain, but weirder, crazy animals can still piss you off. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed and want to learn more about orcas, check out this video here.